Well, I'm PhocusWire Editor-in-Chief Mitra Sorrells, and I am joined today by Nina Wittkamp. She is partner at McKinsey, and Evgeni Kochman, associate partner at McKinsey. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Mitra. Good to have you.
Thanks for having us, Mitra.
Absolutely. So we are talking today about investment patterns and kind of that finding the next disruptor, I guess is a way to put it. Let's start by talking about the areas that you have seen that have attracted the most funding, and how has that evolved over the last few years?
Interesting question, Mitra. So in our research, what came out that the top three sub-verticals have historically been hospitality, transportation, and booking experience. So these three categories or sub-verticals have been responsible for approximately 70% of overall startup funding. And within that group, actually, hospitality has been the absolute category leader with approximately 45 to 50% of total funding. So with a distance. Interestingly, in the last years, we've seen two new categories on the rise. It was in-trip, so basically everything around holiday experience, and also business travel, both doubling their share in overall funding to 15 and 11% correspondingly. So quite a large jump there. We have all seen startups like Get Your Guide and Trip Actions in these categories on the rise, and especially business travel has historically seen only under 5% of total funding. So this is why we believe it's really about time that we now see a little bit of more innovation in these areas.
It's interesting that we see this in a time where business travel was close to zero during the pandemic, but I think it also shows how investors are seeing through some of these cycles and rather look at overall maturity level or innovation potential in these sectors, regardless of, say, economic or sector performance in one or two specific years, which I think is quite encouraging.
Yeah, that's certainly more of a longer view there, I guess. Yeah. So let's talk, what are some specific themes across the industry that you are seeing? And can you maybe give some specific examples?
And maybe we can cover two categories in a little bit more detail, hospitality and then the aviation industry. So these are two of the most mature sub-verticals and category in startup funding. And if we look a little bit deeper into that, also the themes become more relatable to the individual situations of the categories. So if we take a look at hospitality, most of this startup funding in the last 2 years were focusing on distribution models. So really doubling down on the retail experience, on new distribution technologies, including the modernization of legacy technology, like the PMS and the CRS side of this world. At the same time, many startups have been pushing, and investors have been interested in, new product categories, focusing on niche travel or really sustainable travel, with new brands popping up, really targeting a laser-sharp value proposition here at specific travelers. And then the last piece was more focusing around technology-driven integration of multiple offerings. So think additional ancillaries or combining in-trip experiences with the actual booking process. So combining more products into a one-stop shop.
And I would say, sorry.
No, go ahead. Let's hear what you have to say.
Yeah, and it's just reflecting on the aviation side, right? Because a lot of the themes are quite similar. I think this notion of a whole connector end-to-end journey has been there for quite some time, but I think has been challenging to push through. So we've seen a lot more innovation in specific parts of the journey. There's payments, there's certainly data and analytics, where the aviation sector is realizing we're very data heavy, and we should get to the next level of efficiencies and performance gains through using more data. And I think retailing it's a topic that requires sort of a lot of modernization on the whole core technology side of the airline, but also the way airlines or other air travel companies are selling to the end customers. That's very exciting. And last but not least, I also want to point out a lot of funding that goes into new forms of mobility, whether that's the shared mobility version of private jets, or eVTOL, last mile transportation, which is, I think, very exciting given the climate change challenges that we're all looking at.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Again, it completely aligns with everything that I'm hearing and seeing on a day-to-day basis. How has the overall startup landscape changed in recent years, would you say?
So we've seen a slight consolidation in the funding landscape and the startup landscape. So if you think about the share of top 5 players to how much funding they actually receive, it only increased from 59% to 61% of total funding. So not a large increase. The discussion becomes a little bit more interesting if we take a look at the individual verticals. So if you think about pre-travel, booking, and business travel verticals, the funding landscape has consolidated significantly. So if you here think about the top 5 startups, they have been responsible for 85, even up to 95% of the overall funding, which is quite a strong consolidation. So this is a sign that investors have been doubling down on a clear category leader to establish somebody and a certain solution in this vertical. Now, if you think about hospitality, which has been a leading category in total across the last decade, basically, here we have seen a deconsolidation, interestingly. So the share of the top 5 startups have decreased from 60% approximately to 50%. And that is again a sign for us that this category was looking more towards a broader variety of startups to increase innovation, right? Because we've all seen the Oyos and the Airbnbs in the last 5 to 6 years really being dominant in this space. And now we believe that there was a little bit of a broader view on diversification and new possibilities.
Okay, very interesting. And then finally, I would ask, who is behind the investments and how do the investment patterns differ?
Also, again, very interesting question. So in our report, we have taken a look at 4 types of investors. The angel and private investors types, VC and PEs, then corporate investors, both travel and non-travel corporate investors, and then we have included also public funding and banks. Historically, VCs and private equities are typically taking the highest share, making 70 to sometimes even 90% of total funding. Now, interesting is what their typical pattern of investment is. And here, before COVID, corporate travel investors, VCs, PEs, and also angel investors had very similar patterns. So there was a little bit of a, I would say, uniform distribution across the individual categories, with maybe VCs and angel investors investing a little bit more into upcoming verticals like pre-travel, but overall there was a uniform distribution. The rest of the investors was very much focused on hospitality, with over 70% of the investments going into that. So really betting on established players. Now, in recent years, this has changed. All investors have made their individual bets, so we haven't seen a clear pattern. What we have seen is, though, that angel and private investors, as well as VCs and PEs, have been focusing more on new upcoming verticals, especially in-trip, like holiday experience and business travel, while corporate investors have been more relying on, I would say, booking startups and hospitality, making up the majority of their investments. So going back to a little bit, I would say, more historic-driven patterns. And of course, as this was the time of the travel rebound, it makes sense that travel corporates also focus on what's closest to them. This is, acquiring customers and selling products and getting the travel industry to rebound. But nevertheless, it feels a little bit that VCs, PEs, and angel investors are a little bit shaping the investment patterns of this industry.
Okay. Very, very interesting. Well, we are out of time. Nina and Evgeni, thank you so much for sharing these insights related to startup funding and investments across the travel industry.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Mitra.
Thank you. Take care.